Okay, I'm Adam Spence. I am going to talk about the tackle scenario matrix that I came up with this offseason. A little bit about me. I've been coaching at Allendale High School in West Michigan since 2009. This upcoming season, I'm taking a year or two off. But last two seasons, I have served as the varsity defensive coordinator. Was really blessed to work for head coach Ben Burke for all 13 of those seasons. He was someone who was truly valued the important stuff in life. I was really thankful for his friendship and mentorship. I also got to learn from another mentor of mine, Scott Dealing, who was the defensive coordinator for the first 11 years at Allendale. He's one of the best. So I learned a lot from those two guys. A lot of that, what we talk about tonight, will be influence from them. So our ultimate goal as a defensive staff was to equip our players with what we call the toolbox of tackling skills and techniques. We all, as defensive coaches, want our players to get that picture-perfect tackle where they have a square entry, they're upward striking contact through the numbers, they clamp their arms, the ball carrier either gets stopped dead in his tracks, or we drive him back into the dirt. But one of the things that we noticed over time, and as we did some of our off-season studies, was that football is obviously a very dynamic sport. And sometimes the skills and talent that our kids have is going to vary. So we started trying to teach tools and skills to help players be confident in the different scenarios that they'd come across in a football play, so that we can still make the best tackle possible. And another thing that we kind of realized the more that we studied ourselves was that it was very rare in a football game that we would come across the scenario where that perfect form tackle comes up, at least as much as we used to drill it. So we talk about three things a lot for our players of what they have to do to tackle. And one is to obviously get into position. And we accomplish teaching that through our leverage and block destruction drills. Two is violently make contact. And we've got some drills that we do in the summer. In Michigan, we can't do any padded practices, but they can have helmets. So we do a lot with bags and things like that. And then our contact drills that we'll incorporate in fall camp and then through the season. And then the third thing is to finish, obviously, and we do that. We teach that through our contact drills. We try to limit the ball carrier's movement after contact as much as possible. For some of our athletes, that means burying the ball carrier into the dirt. For others, it means just not missing the tackle or getting dragged around like a rag doll. We tell all of our defenders that the goal is to stalemate and or drive the ball carrier back into the ground, but we equip them with different tools to finish the tackle if that doesn't happen. So the tackling matrix is something that I came up with this offseason after I completed our tackle study. I wanted to try to create a visual that would narrow down the techniques we want to try to use to put the bad guy on the ground. We based it on three things: the runner's intent, his position on the field, or our position on the field as a defender, and then whether the defender is engaged or disengaged with the blocker. And the primary purpose is for our coaching staff or a coaching staff to be able to have common language and then to build drills for their position groups based on what we think our kids are most likely to encounter on a Friday night. And for players, it gives them kind of if-then types of scenarios where, if you're in the box and engaged with the blocker, then you do this. If you are running laterally to the sideline and you are not engaged, then you're going to do this. And we think that, excuse me, that it kind of helps them narrow down the techniques that they need to use to be successful. So here's the example of the tackling matrix. And so in that left-hand column, it talks about the runner's intent. The next column is location on the field, the type of block scenario that we'll teach them based on what the runner is doing and where they are in the field, whether they're disengaged, the type of tackle, and then points of emphasis or coaching tips there. So I've kind of mentioned this a couple of times, but I've done a tackle study each of the past few off seasons, and I get all of our clips where there's a tackle made in a game. I put it all in a big playlist. I've got a huddle columns where I track things like the types of tackles that occur, if the tackler has to defeat a block, if so, who is it against, where is it, who's making those types of tackles, group versus solo, is the tackler dragged, does he get a stop, does he drive the ball carrier back, is there a turnover opportunity, all sorts of different things. And what these studies have helped us to do is determine where most tackles happen per position group and what types of tackles each position group is using the most. And so then I use that information to build that tackle matrix. It's meant to help coaching staffs put all of the information together, determine what types of techniques to use in different scenarios to stop that ball carrier. All right, so that first column, runner is, and we just use north-south or east-west as far as language. So we're trying to keep this relatively simple so our kids don't have to try and guess what he's doing. You know, if he's coming downhill, we call that north-south. If his shoulders are turned, he's trying to get to the edge or perimeter, and that's east-west. The only other runner is type of scenario we had was if he's engaged by another defender, because we would want to attack him a little bit differently in that scenario. And so I mainly came up with this last season when I was working with our linebackers, because we were teaching them to destroy blocks a little bit differently based on what the ball carrier's intent was, whether it's downhill or lateral. And so now we start to pair those decisions up with the type of block destruction techniques they use, and then if they're engaged or disengaged, the types of tackles that they're going to use. Location on the field, try to, again, to kind of keep it simple, but these are where more of the position groups we notice start to show up more. In the box, you know, off of our tackle study, we found that's mostly linebackers and defensive linemen. Occasionally it's a safety. In the open field, mostly defensive backs. It was actually fairly rare that we had a linebacker making open field tackles, and even more rare that it was a defensive lineman. Outside the numbers is mostly going to be defensive backs, and it is occasionally a linebacker, or I'm sorry, it's mostly defensive backs and linebackers with occasionally a defensive lineman. We found that's usually if he's pursuing the play down the line of scrimmage. Goal line can be anyone, and we think everyone needs to know how to do this and how to protect the goal line and or the line to gain in a third and short or fourth and short scenario. My plan going forward would be to have a session of this at least once per week for all the position groups, and we've got some drills that we use that we would try to emphasize a little bit more. And then defender trailing, I think this is a really important one that all players know and practice too, because there's going to be a time in a game where the tackler doesn't get that perfect square entry point that we are hoping for. They still need to have a plan or technique to get the bad guy on the ground. So these positions on the field and the position groups really kind of dictate the type of drills that we're going to end up teaching those players. Block destruction. We also, you know, like we teach different types of tackling, we also teach more than one type of block destruction. And again, that's to try to give them different tools that fit different scenarios. When I first started coaching, we really kind of only taught, you know, one or two types of tackles. We taught, you know, basically one type of block destruction. And what we found is, you know, there's not a one size fit all for either of those things. But we also try to keep the number of techniques to a minimum. And I believe that helps our kids play faster. And so certain positions only learned one or two techniques. And the techniques that we taught, what we called booth, block destruction, swipe and rip, dip and rip, and then avoid. I'll talk through each of those here in just a second. So booth technique is something that every position needs to learn. We used it most often when we were in the box and with the runner north and south. So that means that it's most likely to be linebackers that need it, defensive linemen, occasionally safeties when we get an extra guy in the box. It's very similar to, I think, what a lot of people call is shock and shed. But we tell the kids it's like fighting someone in a phone booth, and they kind of dig that language. And we emphasize that it's going to be really physical, and we tell them that this is where it's going to be the max contact with the blocker. We really are destroying this block before we think about anything to do with the ball carrier. And what we teach them is that if they're going to fight in a phone booth, and if they're going to make that tackle in a phone booth, the first thing they're trying to do is squeeze the blocker into the gap that they're leveraging. And so that's what we try to tell them is why it's going to be maximum contact, is I really have to squeeze him into the gap so that I'm forcing that ball carrier to bounce to me. If we can disengage, we end up using a profile tackle. We call that tear to square, and I've got a cut up or a drill film of that. If we can't disengage, we convert it to a one-arm tackle. And one-arm tackles are what happen the most in a game, we found. And this year, we were much better in the box tackling because our kids really got pretty good at the one-arm tackles while they were engaged with the blockers. And the one-arm tackle came from Coach Dig, who I found on Twitter, and then I bought his Coach Tube clinics, and they are really, really great tackling clinics. And a lot of what we ended up doing this year was based off of what we learned from Coach Dig. And one-arm tackles and being engaged with that blocker really showed up on film a lot on Fridays for us, and I think it was a big reason why we were an improved tackling team overall. Swipe and rip and dip and rip are very similar techniques. We mostly use it for linebackers. Occasionally defensive backs use it. And this was for when the ball carrier was running east-west. And here, instead of the booth technique where we emphasize as much contact as possible, we want as little amount of contact because we're telling our defenders that that ball carrier is trying to get to the edge. So we need to get there ASAP. We don't want to mess around with the blocker. What I taught the linebackers this last season was that they're going to swipe and rip versus low hands. And for a visual, we told them that it was below the pec of the blocker. And then dip and rip versus high hands, and we said that was above the pec. What ended up happening is some kids were much more comfortable with one technique over the other. And what I started to find was it didn't really realize, or it didn't really matter what technique they were using, swipe and rip or dip and rip, as long as they were being decisive about it as soon as they saw those hands or as soon as they were closing the gap on that ball carrier. And I was good with it because it eliminated overthinking and they just started playing fast. And then our last technique, we only taught this to defensive backs, but it was our avoid technique. And we use it when there's separation between the receiver trying to block them and themselves. And the big emphasis on avoid is that they have to avoid to their leverage side. And for us, cornerbacks were usually outside in, safeties usually inside out. There were, some fronts or coverages where that might change a little bit, but that was kind of the general rule of thumb. Here's the rest of the matrix, disengaged, and then so we're gonna just say yes or no, and then it goes into type of tackle, and then our points of emphasis here. All right, so here's some drills from practice. Got a couple of things that we use to teach profile tackling. And then I'll have a game clip as well of a profile tackle in action. So here we're utilizing our high jump pit. It's before we had our crash pad, which if you guys don't have crash pads, we bought one this past season and we use it all the time. It was a really great investment. So what we're trying to emphasize here is getting our nose to the numbers, pointing our toes at the target, what we call our clamp. I know some guys still use the term wrap up their arms. We talk about clamping the ball carrier and then chasing the tackle. Those are just some of the buzzwords that we use with our kids. So here is not a bad rep by this kid. What I would like to see, he's a little bit far from the ball carrier when he first strikes. At least that near foot is a little bit far. So we would coach him up on that. Because he's a little bit far when he first tries to make contact, he doesn't get a foot strike and shoulder strike that's simultaneous, which is ideal. One of the things that I learned from Coach Digg is that, and what we emphasize to our kids a lot, is that with that near foot, you're trying to strike that into the ground as close to the time that your shoulder strikes the ball carrier as possible, because that's when you're going to generate the most power. But he does a good job here of chasing the tackle. His clamp is a little bit higher than ideal here. If you look, he's kind of right around the waist. We would prefer him to have the crook of his elbow right at the top of the hamstring of that ball carrier. But does a good job chasing the ball carrier into the high jump pit. Here's another drill that we utilize. This was one that we used in the summer. And this was kind of the end of our teaching progression. So we're going to start this tackler about 10 yards from, this is a tackle wheel that we've got set up. We've got a number 1 taped on the tackle wheel so that he can work on getting his nose to numbers. And if you look, we've got players on each side of an agility bag. These players are going to swing their bags and try to disrupt the tackler as he shimmies down over the agility bag. And the main reason for this is to help teach these kids, the tacklers, that we want to widen our feet as we shimmy down. We want to sink our hips so that we have a good, strong base. So he shimmies, strikes with the same foot, same shoulder. He does a good job there of getting his foot almost right on that bag as he strikes. We would have wanted to work on his arms shooting on contact. This was the first time that we had done this drill. And if you watch him here, he kind of just reaches to grab it. He was more worried about making sure that that tackle wheel didn't get away from him. One of the things that we emphasize with our hands and our arms as we work to clamp is we want to shoot really tight uppercuts to our bodies. And I tell the kids, tight elbows out as they shoot. And clamp them back into my body. I want to clamp my elbows tight back into my body too. So we always say tight elbows out, tight elbows in. All right. So here's a clip from one of our games. We're in the red here. We're going to watch this middle linebacker right here. And I apologize for the grainy film. Our iPad that we use to film our games with was not the greatest. We can still get a pretty good look here. So watch him. He overscrapes a bit, but corrects himself and gets back into the gap. And what he knows is that it's going to be a profile tackle because he's in the box and this ball carrier is coming north and south at him right now. Okay. He starts to work down, gets nose to numbers, tries to strike up through the ball carrier's chest, and does a good job of stopping him in his tracks there. All right, so I'm going to show some of our engaged drills. This is the one that we call tear to square. Now this is to simulate booth technique as far as block destruction goes. This is what we found happened the least amount in a game. Our kids didn't tear away from a blocker very often to make it into a profile tackle. So it's something that we still rep because we believe that was the ideal. Obviously if he's disengaged from the blocker, he's got a better chance of completing that tackle. But this was on our, we did Tuesdays were just shells. It was we called it Technique Tuesday. So we didn't have a lot of full contact. And one way that we still were able to work tackling on Tuesdays is to minimize the contact. We'd start our defenders engaged with the blocker, kind of eliminates that that contact or eliminates the chance of them banging heads while they're both trying to get into the same gap. So we're going to start him engaged. His leverage is to his right here, and he's going to squeeze. He's going to tear away, strike with his shoulder, and he chases the tackle into that crash pad. We tell the blocker to give some resistance, but again, it's a technique day, so we're more focused on the defender being able to feel what it likes to tear free from that blocker, and then to the point where he can work himself back to square, strike his foot and his shoulder at the same time, shoot his clamps, and then chase into the crash pad here. Here he does a good job tearing away. We would like to see a little bit better foot and shoulder strike, and then tighter uppercuts. If I'm going to play this back here again, if you watch his elbows, they're kind of out to his side instead of shooting tight to his body. But the thing that's really good is where he clamps on the ball carrier. He gets right under the knee joint here of that ball carrier and does a pretty good job of squeezing it back into his chest. The term that we use for that is kill the motor, because we're trying to get to the upper thighs of the ball carrier, or in this case, he got a little bit lower. He got right behind that knee joint. But kill the motor of that ball carrier, squeeze him back into your chest. And then this drill is engaged, but it's where we can't tear away. We can't get tear to square. And so this is our one-arm tackle, and this is how we taught this through drills. If you notice, we're not even in shells here. This is a fairly low contact drill. And again, it's more about teaching the technique of squeezing this blocker into the gap so that I force the ball carrier to what should be my open arm. And then the things that we emphasize is being really, really violent with that one-armed uppercut. That's probably one of the most important things, is throwing that. We still try to strike that, what will be this defender's outside foot. He's going to want to try to strike the ground the same time his uppercut's making contact with this ball carrier. And then the next thing that we coach up is you want to try to disengage that inside hand as soon as you can, and so you can get to a two-arm clamp on that ball carrier. And this kid is really, really good at this. So he's squeezing a violent uppercut, and then if you watch that inside hand comes away just as soon as he can to clamp that ball carrier up. Now, like I said, the one-arm tackle in the box showed up all the time on a Friday night. And so on this one, we're going to be watching this the defensive end on the top of our screen. He's going to engage with this offensive tackle. He's squeezing, shoots that uppercut. Now, what you may notice with the one-arm tackles, as I show you a couple more of these game clips, is that they don't always end up being the prettiest tackle, but because we were teaching them how to make that initial contact with one arm and then how to quickly clamp that second arm so that we're fully engaged with that tackler or the ball carrier now, he ends up on the ground for a very minimal gain here. So we'll watch one more time here at the top. And then he ended up with a little help from his friend there too, but because he could strike the uppercut with his outside arm, he quickly clamped. That ball carrier didn't have much of a chance. Here's another one. We're in black on in this game here. We're gonna watch the nose guard who's right behind the play button. Now, the only thing we would have coached him up on in this instance is he doesn't get disengaged with that blocker with his inside hand, but he does a really good job with his what was the free one arm of clamping that ball carrier or the ball carrier into his body with that one hand. And this kid was just strong as an ox for us, and he could get away with something like that. But still, if you notice, he makes all of the contact with the one free arm and the one shoulder, and while he wasn't able to disengage with the inside hand here, he was still able to pull that ball carrier into him and run his feet to finish that tackle. Here's another one that happens. This is going to happen deep into the backfield here. We've got a blitzing linebacker here. This play ended up being kind of funky because the ball carrier pitched it back to the quarterback after he got wrapped up with the one arm here by our tackler. But we're going to watch this blitzer here. Okay, engaged. Does a really nice job of striking with his one free arm and the shoulder. Now, because he's blitzing, he doesn't do as good of a job as we would want with the inside arm to try to leverage that blocker and gain a little bit of separation. But just does a really nice job of striking with this open arm here. And then does a good job of coming disengaged to clamp. They try to get pretty fancy there at the end. Strike, clamp, and then he's trying to work down to the legs to kill the motor on the ball carrier there. Well, that one started pretty quick. Sorry about that. We'll redo this one. So this we're going to catch it mid-play here, but this is a defensive back who's using the one arm. One of our corners, he's off the screen right now, but he gets engaged with the blocker on the edge. His uppercut is not as violent as we would like here, but he does a good job of disengaging his inside hand to clamp the ball carrier there. So strike, clamp, works into the sideline. Now I've got a clip here of how I would teach the linebackers to swipe and rip here. We are at the point in the season now where almost all of our linebackers were using swipe and rip, so we didn't even worry too much about dip and rip. So you're actually going to see the blocker here. He shows high hands, and what I talked about earlier in the presentation was against high hands, we had initially taught to dip and rip under those, but this linebacker was more comfortable with the swipe and rip, and it ended up being as effective. So he's going to swipe, rip, and then we work to get under the chute there and work into that crash pad. One thing we would tell him, let's try to get a little bit more downhill faster. But we also, I don't have clips of it, again, being a middle-sized school here in Michigan, if I was going to film a drill, I had to do it on my own with my cell phone. We didn't have guys film and practice. But we'd also work this drill with the tackle wheel so that they're hitting a moving target. And in that case, we'd get rid of the chute here so that they don't have to worry about trying to time the tackle wheel and the chute and things like that. But one of the things we did struggle with this year was, if we're coming from depth, working to get our nose to numbers and getting our shoulders lower and getting our hips back. And that's why we're utilizing the chute here. All right, and I don't have thigh and roll drill film, but as a lot of guys probably know, this is a type of tackle that also happens all the time on a Friday night. But the way that tackle matrix comes into handy is we can now tell the kids, the ball carrier's shoulders are east and west. So I'm running laterally, he's trying to get to the edge. Most likely I'm either going to utilize swipe and rip or dip and rip, or I'm going to be unblocked, and I'm going to use thigh and roll because of where I'm at on the football field and what the ball carrier is doing with his shoulders. But the way we teach that profile tackle, the way we teach that the thigh and roll is really not anything revolutionary. I'm sure a lot of guys teach it the same or very, very similar. The one arm tackle is still what I think was our biggest difference maker here. But you're going to see this tackler come from depth and off the screen. What we do make sure that we talk about is still killing that motor. We want to get to the thighs here, which he does a good job. He ends up working a little bit lower than what we would initially want where he strikes, but he does a good job of clamping the legs, killing the motor, and then we always are telling their kids, you got to roll to your leverage, and that helps to stop the ball carrier as soon as possible. So here he's rolling to his leverage. Here's another one here with our safety coming downhill. Again, he gets to the thigh of the ball carrier. It's not a real solid shoulder strike, but he does a good job of shooting his arms and killing the motor on this ball carrier. And then again, he's coming inside out, so he rolls to his leverage to stop that ball carrier right there. All right, so one of the things that we worked on, especially with the defensive backs, is our sideline or escort tackle. And one of the things that the tackle matrix is meant to help us with in these scenarios is trying to avoid the 15-yard penalty of, I'm sure that we, as defensive coaches, we've all seen it called in a game that's frustrating. You know, we might make contact right at the sideline or even, you know, a yard or two before, and an official with happy flag hand is going to throw that yellow laundry at us. So what we did is in the tackle matrix, we talk about if the ball carrier's shoulders are north and south outside the numbers, we're going to attack that different than if his shoulders are pointed east and west outside the numbers. And so what I have here is a clip from our end zone cam of the ball carrier's shoulders being east and west, and he's outside the numbers. So our cornerback knows that he's going to turn this into what we call an escort tackle. And we're really just trying to eliminate the 15-yard penalty while also stopping the play. So he's going to be off screen over here. It's the corner. But if we look, we've got shoulders. The ball carrier ends up getting his shoulders north and south at the end. But when he's outside the numbers and when our corner has committed to making that play, his shoulders were east-west. So he's working on and thinking, I'm going to escort him to the sideline. I'm going to escort him out of bounds and end this play. So if you look, it's not a real violent strike. He's worried about getting kind of up just underneath the armpits or just underneath the shoulder pads of that ball carrier. He's trying to grab cloth. And then we tell the kids, escort him out of bounds, walk him right out of bounds, and we'll rally on that next play. So I'll show that one more time here. When he commits, the shoulders are east and west, so he's thinking about getting kind of high here and just walking him out of bounds there. Now that ball carrier was kind of trying to cut back at the end, and you know the cornerback ends up on top of him. But you know we would have told him in film study the following Monday that he did a nice job of trying to avoid the 15-yard penalty by escorting him out of the bounds there. All right, so one of the things we also tried to emphasize is what we call high and nasty tackle. It's very, very similar as a goal line tackle, but we're trying to either stop a short yardage play, protect the goal line. We also teach this if the entry point for our tackler is not perfect. You know, we always want to be nose to numbers, but the reality is it doesn't happen every time. So we teach them if we call it a high entry point. If he comes in high, we end up just treating it like the high and nasty or the goal line tackle, where similar to that escort, we're trying to get underneath his armpits or underneath the bottoms of his shoulder pads there, grab some cloth, and if we're going to twist or try to readjust our body, we're adjusting back towards the line of scrimmage. So we're going to watch the inside linebacker right here. He gets going, gets away from his read key, but ends up coming free. And it looks kind of like he gets surprised by meeting the ball carrier where he does. And so his entry point's a little bit high. Whoops, same thing again. So his entry point ends up a little bit high. He readjusts, he's there, but works back towards the line of scrimmage. Here he's high on his strike, but he's underneath the shoulders there. Even though he's not clamping the legs of the ball carrier, he does a really good job of squeezing that ball carrier really tight into his chest, and then he's able to throw back towards the line of scrimmage. We got another one here. We're going to watch this outside linebacker. He comes free on a blitz. Again, I think he kind of surprises himself when he meets the ball carrier, and so he ends up with a high entry point. One of the things we really coach up on a high and nasty or a goal line type of tackle is extending the hips, because and what we tell the kids in a goal line scenario, we don't necessarily want to come in nose to numbers and wrap those legs up, because against even a running back that's not big and powerful, sometimes we're going to get, if we don't have our hips right, or if we don't have our feet right, we could get bowled over and we could give up that extra yard that could lead to a first down or a touchdown. So we talk about coming in hot, about the shoulder pad height, trying to still strike up and through. But what's really important is the hip extension, so that we can either stalemate that ball carrier and wait for help, or we can run him back. And what our outside linebacker does a really good job here of is extending his hips, so much so that he ends up pulling him almost immediately right down on top of himself. So he's high, his hips are extended, but he keeps chasing that tackle. And stops him in his tracks. It doesn't look the prettiest, but it was still a nice TFL for us. All right, and then here's one that I think is really important, is teaching players that last chance tackle. On the tackle matrix, some of the coaching points are, we're either trying to clamp at his ankles as we're fully extended, or we're trying to swipe through and trip up his ankles. But the aiming point is going to be basically the lower shin, high ankle area of the ball carrier, so that we can trip him up. And so what we're going to do is we're going to watch this safety here. He comes down to the box, kind of misjudges his fit, and he recovers really well, to the point where he has to he has a chance to extend out and get this ball carrier. So he's going to extend here, and then he closes those wrists right around the ankles of the ball carrier to trip him up. Now, obviously, this isn't the type of tackle that we want to see over and over on a Friday night, but it's going to happen in a game, and I think it's important that your kids are equipped with a tool in their toolbox to still be able to make a play, so that we can try and rally on the next down. So swipes at those ankles, clamps his arms, trips up, and then we survive for the next down. All right, then open field. The way we teach open field tackling is probably not different than a lot of other people, but we're a pretty good wrestling school. We have a lot of wrestlers, and so sometimes I liken an open field tackle to a single leg takedown. Now, for us to consider it an open field tackle, the ball carrier is going to be north and south, and we're obviously in the open field. And so in that scenario, we're telling our kids, you got to take your shot, but you can't dance, and you can't wait for him to be able to try to make a move. You've got to eye the near hip that you're going to attack. You're going to shoot for one leg. You're going to clamp. And what is the best, and what this clip shows, is when we can do all of that and still get a great shoulder strike and then work to that single leg. So we're going to watch number 6 right here. So he's going to drop in his coverage here. Works to that single leg. He does a really good job of striking through this. So as he drops, he eyes the ball carrier. He's going to drop. He's going to find that ball carrier as the ball is released. Okay, and now right here, it's fairly square shoulders. He's coming downhill. Number 6 right here does a good job of working to get himself square. That's one of our coaching points in an open field tackle. We want to have square entry. And then he does a really nice job of striking, working to that, what essentially turns into a single leg takedown for him. But working, he takes a shot, gets the one leg, nice strike there. He ends up forcing a turnover for us too, which was added bonus. All right, now the group tackle. So this is on the tackle matrix. This is where the ball carrier is engaged by another defender. One of the key coaching points that we tell these guys is to be accurate. You don't want to come in like a kamikaze and take off, the head of your teammate, or to come in out of control and knock your teammate into next week. So what you're going to see on this clip here is that once this ball carrier is engaged by a defender, we get 3 or 4 extra hats, but they're really under control. What we want them to do is still try to strike up and through. So you're going to see guys as they get to the pile, they really slow themselves down, but then they work to get those numbers and get good leverage on that ball carrier so that they can help out that initial defender by stopping the ball carrier and then driving him back. Now, some added things that we're going to try and coach these guys up on it. If you see one arm on that ball, the ball carrier is already engaged by one of the good guys, one of us, then start punching or lawnmower ripping at that football. But securing the tackle is first and foremost important to us. So he's engaged. We get guys coming late to the party. And again, none of those strikes are violent. And we tell the guys that in a group tackle, if you're coming late to the party, you don't have to be violent. The biggest thing is, again, trying to get leverage up and through the ball carrier so that we stop his momentum, and then our momentum carries him back to either a stalemate or we can continue driving back like happens in this play. So here we've got him engaged, and if you watch number 4 right down here, he's one who comes late to the party, but he's under control and trying to work up and through. So that's the tackle matrix that we worked on coming up with this off season, and I paired it up with some of the drills that we would use to teach our kids. Tried to show some game clips of the things that we noticed the most in our off season tackle studies, and how much they come up on a Friday night. I hope that you were able to gain something from this, even if it's one little thing. I think that that was always my goals when I went to a clinic, is each speaker try to find one thing that I could apply to my team. Now the link to the tackle matrix is going to be in the description here, and it's going to be as a shareable link, so that if anybody would like to, you can make a copy of that, and then you can tailor it to however your program wants to teach it. You can change the coaching points to kind of fit your guys' lingo. You could, if there are other scenarios that you notice through your own studies that come up a lot for you guys, you can add to that. But hopefully, seeing that tackle matrix, how we applied it, how we use it to teach our kids, is something that you can use in your upcoming season. So thank you very much for having me on. Had a blast talking about it. I love talking about tackling. Love talking defense too, but really, really passionate about tackling. And I'm on Twitter. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about things that you saw here. If there's anything I can clarify or to help clear up, I would be happy to do that. Yeah, I think that it can be used for both. Initially I created it so that our defensive staff would have a common language, and so that our defensive staff was all on the same page with that if-then type of scenario, right? If we're in the box and engaged, then we're going to use this. If we are running laterally and we're disengaged, then we're going to use this type of tackle. I think that the kids could benefit a lot from it too. I would probably try to pare it down a bit so that, you know, they don't have that huge document to look at and go, oh man, you know, I don't ever use a one-arm tackle because I'm a safety, or I don't ever use the avoid technique because I'm a defensive lineman. So I think that the information would be useful for the kids. But again, I'd try to pare it down to by position group. What are they going to utilize the most? And one of the things that we found, linebackers is probably the one position group that needs the most in their toolbox on a Friday night, because they're in the box. You know, if you got good ones, they're outside of the box. They're running sideline to sideline, hopefully making plays all over the place for you. So they're the ones that need to know the most, or at least have kind of the most equipped in their toolbox on a Friday night to be successful. Something that we found. Yeah, well, so before we had that crash pad, we utilized our high jump pit. And you know, I was a little leery of that at first. I thought the track coach was going to get all over our case, but really, it's less wear and tear on it than a high jumper's spikes as he rolls off and or as he tries to step off. So the high jump pit is something, you know, we even talked about, hey, do we need a crash pad if we can use the high jump pit? The barrier for us was that our practice field was far enough away from where those high jumps pits were. It was going to be a big pain in the rear for us to try and get way out there, utilize them for 10 minutes, and then get back to the practice field. But you know, I would say if you can use the high jump pit, like you can't, maybe you don't have it in your budget for a crash pad. If you can use the high jump pit, I think that's a good alternative. It's it limits you a little bit because it's a little bit higher than the crash pad. You know, that the top layer is a little bit higher than the crash pad, but you can still get a lot of really good work out of it. And you know, in Coach Diggs' Coach Tube series, they use the high jump pits a lot. And that was where I first kind of got the idea. And then I started doing a little bit more research on Twitter and on the internet and seeing other coaches use these crash pads. And I was able to talk our coach into using it. I do think if you have the means that's in your budget, and if you can talk your head coach into it, you're going to find you use it all the time. We used it. Yeah, we used it every day in practice and loved it. We'd rotate indie groups through it so that everybody got a chance to really tackle and chase that ball carrier into the ground. I think was really beneficial for us.